You are listening to The Dish on Health IT, brought to you by Point of Care Partners, a leading health IT consultancy. Each episode will feature a rotating panel of senior consultants and guests who will talk about trends and innovations in health IT, while also highlighting how organizations can leverage these advances to solve their business problems. In this episode of The Dish on Health IT, we dig into the layered and often complex world of payer interoperability and innovation. We're touching on everything from evolving policy and standards to the role of AI. Host Tony Schueth, CEO of Point of Care Partners, and Kendra Obrist, Senior Consultant and Payer Interoperability Expert, welcome guest Rob Alger, Senior Vice President of Health Plan Technology at Kaiser Permanente. Get ready for an insightful conversation. We hope the discussion sparks new ideas and perspectives on this topic. If you have suggestions for future topics, drop us a line at podcast@pocp.com or visit our podcast page at pocp.com under the Insights sections to share your thoughts.
Welcome to The Dish on Health IT, where we serve up hot takes and real talk from the front lines of health IT. I'm Tony Schueth, CEO of Point of Care Partners, and I'll be your host today. Today's episode is all about payer interoperability and innovation, a topic that's come a long way in recent years, but one that's still full of complexity, policy drivers, and plenty of moving parts. Joining me as co-host and expert contributor is Kendra Obrist, Senior Consultant and Payer Interoperability Subject Matter Expert, who works with our payer clients on interoperability strategies and prioritizing how they're using their resources. We are so happy to welcome today our very special guest, Rob Alger, Senior Vice President of Health Plan Technology at Kaiser Permanente. Before we dive into meeting our guests and on the topic of the day, Kendra, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. Kendra Obrist. I'm a senior consultant with Point of Care Partners. I've been with the Point of Care Partners team for about 13 years, have 30 odd years of experience in healthcare technology. The majority of that time has been in the payer provider exchange space. Interoperability didn't used to be a word. So I'm pretty well versed in the payer community and work closely with them and the technology vendors that serve them.
Yeah, we used to call it connectivity, didn't we? Connectivity. Yeah, Kendra and you have known each other for a lot of those 30 plus years. Mm-hmm. Rob, you and I have known each other for a long, long time as well. But could you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Sure. So first off, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today, Tony and Kendra. So Rob Alger with Kaiser Permanente. My main responsibility with Kaiser is really our IT plan in the terms of our 5-year strategy for how do we think about what are the capabilities we need to develop as a health plan in conjunction with our clinical partners and others. My background is primarily health plan IT. I knew Tony when I was president of MediSystems way in the back when we were working with Medco, and have been the chief information officer for Blue Shield of California, and did a long gig in consulting, and have worked in various forms of interoperability across the 20-year thing. So pleasure to join you here today.
And it's a pleasure to have you. Rob, Kaiser's integrated model, combining care and coverage, makes you a little bit unique. How does that shape your approach to health IT investments and decision-making?
It's critical. So, Kaiser is unique in the fact that we do think of ourselves as care and coverage together. We don't have the separation between the health plan function and the clinical function. As you know, we've spent so many years in our careers and other settings of trying to influence how clinicians practice, from formulary compliance to much more sophisticated tools over the years. And a lot of interoperability, frankly, has to do with how do you move data between clinicians and plans and back and forth, and how do you think about reimbursement. So in Kaiser, those are not the drivers. We really are looking at how do we make the experience for our members and our patients as streamlined and as effective as possible. So when I think about the health plan side of the IT investment, a big part of it we're doing right now is really what's the consumer experience? So how do you experience healthcare? How do we make it as simple and straightforward as we can? And how do we take whatever the bumps on the clinical side and move those out? So how do you bring someone who's brand new? How do you bring someone who's transitioning? How do you manage all of those pieces? And then this is all played out against the broader world of digital, the broader world of AI, machine learning, and cloud transitions, and all of the new tech that we stack up. So those are really the ways we think about it, Tony.
And streamline is super important. Health IT is critical for that. More specifically, what as a health plan is your sort of strategy for the coming year? Several of our health plan clients have regulatory requirements around CMS 0057. What components of 0057 are impacting you the most, and how heavy a lift are you seeing it being?
Well, of course, 0057 has to do with auth and referral. And so, there's sort of two components to Kaiser. We certainly, within our own, where our physician management groups are tightly coupled in the care and coverage, we don't really have that process. The auth and referral occurs within the PMG. It doesn't have to echo back and forth with the health plan for review or approval. We also have networks, primarily outside of California, where we use non-PMG physicians. So we have the traditional relationship with them. And so we have the same requirements as everyone else in order to implement 057. So we're in the middle of that. It's not as heavy a lift, I would say, probably than most of our competitor plans. It's simply not foundational to how we act and behave, but we have to meet the requirements. So we're have the same FHIR systems in place and are doing that right now. It'll be interesting to see how effective it is. Does it take some of the tension out? Does it simply make what can be a bit of an awkward process a little more streamlined, but still awkward? I don't know. I think the jury's out on this one.
I think so as well. Kendra, what do you think? You work with our payer clients on 0057. What's your view on it?
I mean, I think the jury's out, also. It all comes down to sort of, will it get used and will it make anything better? And the first, to make it better, it has to get used. And so the elusive provider adoption factor is really, really important. Payers are on the hook to meet specific requirements. They are going to invest a lot of money doing that, and a lot of time and a lot of resource. And I think that they are rightfully concerned that the providers won't have the right tools to participate, and the providers are really heavily dependent on their EHR vendors to give them the tools, and they know that. And so there's this meeting in the middle that hasn't quite happened yet. And I think that's where the magic will happen. I'm certainly hopeful that it will, but I don't think it's real clear yet.
Looking at 2025, what are the top health IT priorities for Kaiser Permanente broadly, and more specifically for the health plan that is your side?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. We mentioned it. I mentioned it briefly. We really are looking at how do we make healthcare simpler for our consumers and more effective, and that's both on the clinical side as well as on the health plan side. I think one of the things that we've been very, very involved in is how do you use AI in the exam room, particularly the work that we've been doing to do clinical documentation as part of an AI function, which does a couple really interesting things. One, it sort of changes the behavior of the clinician in the sense that instead of being tied to the EMR and typing the whole time you're trying to talk to them, you can actually have a conversation. So it's a funny return to before the EMR. It's certainly a part of the dialogue, but it's not the doctor buried in the screen. And then the other part of it, of course, is that instead of the clinician now having to, type up the notes, go through it, it's done, it's ordered. They look at it, and in fact, you have to, look at it and accept it. So it's not like we automatically just take whatever an AI transcribes and make that into the clinical note. But this is the whole process of, seeing the transcriptions, making any changes or corrections, and then adopting it. So it's a win for the patients. It's absolutely a win for the clinicians. So it's been very successful. On the plan side, a lot of the work we've been doing, it continues to be in the digital space. I think we are probably the largest adopter of the digital technology, both as a health plan and as a clinical organization. So we continue to really optimize that in the sense of knowing you, making sure that how we know you, your preferences, your experiences shines through in the digital space. So you don't have to hunt for things. We're anticipating what you need and where you're trying to go. We also have a couple major programs that we've been working for the last couple of years to consolidate all of our membership systems into one single membership system, which is as big a lift as any technology, I think, going on today in healthcare. When you think about it, across over 12.5 million members and multiple systems, and some of them are 30 years old and some are 20 years old, of standing up a new one that covers all of this. So that's been a huge piece of work for us. We did a prior one a couple of years ago where we consolidated all our claim systems into a single one. And a bit of this is allowing Kaiser, we're regional, but we want to operate as a national health plan. And that's really, again, to be more efficient, more effective, more cost effective. Absolutely. So a lot of our technology is in that space. And then, of course, AI ML. We and everyone else are looking for what are the opportunities to make sure that we can use artificial intelligence to let people practice at the top of their license. And that's how we think about it, really. It's not that all of a sudden everyone goes away or chatbots answer every call. It's really how you make sure that someone doing the job, the mundane stuff, the lower level stuff gets done automatically. But when we do it, and we'll probably talk more about this, for us, it's all human in the loop. And, I would be surprised if anyone has moved past that at the moment with some of the challenges in large language models. But really, our goal here is take an aspect of a job that you can do this for, do it automatically, and then really let the person doing the job to bring everything they bring to it and have the other stuff just happen. And so that's been our real direction in that space. So those are some of the key things that we've been working on.
Rob, you said a lot and a lot of really interesting things. But I think the piece that you said that really grabbed me was that we're going almost back to before the EMR. I love that. As a patient, I love that. So I really like that piece. And we will talk a little bit more about AI. But one of the things, that really feeds health IT and helps it to be more valuable is good data and the standards to get data from point A to point B. So we both Point of Care Partners and Kaiser do a lot of work in the standards realm, and we're actively involved in standards development, specifically with FHIR. I'll ask you both to share your views on where we are with FHIR adoption. Is it living up to the hype? Do you see it scaling in a meaningful way across the industry? And Rob, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, to start with, FHIR's non-negotiable standard at this point. In healthcare, there's no question. It's a mandate. ONC 21's Century Cures Act, CMS interoperability, all of those are built on FHIR as a fundamental component. So it's no longer a question of, for these regulatory things, are we going to use FHIR? We're absolutely going to use FHIR. CMS has been quite clear on it. The Office of the National Coordinator has been quite clear on that. So, and it's really, they've emphasized FHIR's role in achieving interoperability. So we're very supportive of that. The EHR vendors have adopted FHIR. Microsoft is all in the back end in terms of FHIR, and others. The question I have is, at what point does FHIR stop being a regulatory push and does it become a pull? So do we, in fact, look to a FHIR architecture as a core way we want to think about it, or do we react to regulatory requirements and use FHIR to meet them? So I think the industry is kind of at this balanced point where it's still a push. I'm not seeing the pull in the FHIR architecture at the moment. The HL7 Da Vinci work is really exciting. The whole FHIR at Scale task force is really exciting. One of my things, I sit on the board of CAQH. We're very much involved through the core program, and how do you think about the standards and the adoption of the standards? We support Sequoia. We're broadly involved, but I really don't know. I really don't know if it's going to change internal fundamental architectures at this point, or it's really going to be a regulatory response. Really interested, Kendra and Tony, how do you guys come down on those issues? What are you seeing?
Kendra, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think I sort of look at FHIR as sort of a long-term architecture for us, and the work that's been done, the early regulatory work around the patient access API and what the G10, what the EHR vendors were required to do to put the FHIR and USCDI-1 up. That was kind of a warm up. It's like sort of getting everybody used. Oh, this is something that's here. You should think about it. You should do it. And the work that is happening now with 0057 will heat that up. It will use it. It'll build on it. Then I think we might start to see the pull, as you articulated that, because people will understand the power of what they have in their hands. And that's happened, in other industries when API technology has taken hold. I always think about financial services and, in the world of writing checks sort of in the olden days, and the ATM where you had the little label on the ATM needed to match the one that was on your card or you couldn't use it. And then you think about where we've come now. And I think much of that is because innovative sort of technology and private companies have gotten involved and helped the institution learn how to use these new things to their advantage.
Absolutely. My perspective is very similar. Rob, you mentioned Da Vinci and the FHIR at Scale task force, not to mention the Sequoia project. We're actively involved in all of those. In fact, we program manage the Da Vinci project and the FAST FHIR at Scale task force. Kaiser's been a longtime participant in one flavor or another of these accelerators. From your perspective, what's the real value of participating in accelerators or other multi-stakeholder initiatives? Is it about shaping standards, testing the real world, learning from peers, or something else entirely?
That's an interesting question. In many ways, we want to help shape standards to make sure that they make sense and that we can adopt them in an efficient and an effective way. But also it gives us a head start in understanding what we have to do and how we have to be thinking about it. So you want to participate, and yes, you have a voice, but really we're there to kind of peer down the road. So what is really going to come? At what rate is it going to come? What do we need to be doing now to make sure that we're well set up for the adoption when that occurs? So for me, it's really, I like the term accelerator because it's accelerating our knowledge. What do we have to do right today in order to be well positioned for tomorrow when these new technologies come out? And it also is part of how we have conversations with vendors, to be perfectly frank, because we're chatting and looking at what are we going to adopt, who's going to provide it, what does it have to be able to do. And we're really interested in, the metaphor, skating where the puck is going to be, but it's critical when you're making vendor decisions that could echo for 10 more years. Are they in line with everything that you're seeing? And if you don't participate, if you're not part of the process, I'm not sure how you know. It just doesn't work like that.
I agree with you, and I'm going to take my facilitator hat off and I'm going to put on my SME hat. And I'll say that multi-stakeholder initiatives is something that I'm very passionate about. Rob, you and I and Kendra and I have seen, efforts where business partners, try to do technology or, trade transactions on a business partner to business partner, business relationship to business relationship perspective. And the problem with that is what happens when they go beyond that? Like in the early days, Rob, remember e-prescribing. The pharmacies were ready, but the providers weren't. And then the providers were ready and the pharmacies had moved on because when the pharmacies were ready, the providers weren't. Technology and healthcare IT transactions are many to many. We've seen efforts where certain segments tried to get the other side to be ready, and they're not always ready. And then we kind of graduated to a phase. In fact, I remember leading a multi-stakeholder effort that was super successful. Well, then they decided that maybe the government should be responsible for that. And what we found was the government, is in a really solid place to lead the industry, but maybe, they didn't have input from all the different stakeholders. And so then we went to a model that I really like right now, which is where industry leaders come together, they identify what problems there are and figure out a way to solve those. And the government's one of those stakeholders, an important stakeholder, but they're not the only one. So I just find that multi-stakeholder efforts are, an important way to sort of solve problems and identify and then solve problems. And I'm super glad that we have them. I think there needs to be more of them. We need to be smart and strategic about them. And we need to sort of make progress. Like you mentioned, Rob, Da Vinci has, that's a super success story. So Kendra, mentioning Da Vinci, which includes payers, kind of what's your take? What do payers and the providers that you work with, how do they view these multi-stakeholder collaboratives?
I think they're for the really, really active participants, part of it is having a seat at the table to shape what's happening. Many of the participants, though, I think just they view it as a way to be involved and to learn and stay connected to what's going on. I think the power in the multi-stakeholder initiatives that has emerged, and Da Vinci being one of them, is that they're actually doing things, not just talking about doing them. They're piloting, they're bringing partners together to actually do things. And whether that's doing it in a connectathon or doing it in a pilot mode, they're actually making things happen and not just documenting things. And I think that's a difference in today's generation of standards development and the multi-stakeholders from before that I think has really been powerful and has accelerated the movement of FHIR into the healthcare industry.
Absolutely. And they've innovated a little bit, but let's talk about innovation, specifically AI. Rob, you mentioned it before, and I know you're pretty passionate about this. Kaiser has made waves, with AI, different AI initiatives. Can you walk us through the main pillars of Kaiser's AI strategy?
Absolutely. So there's a couple really critical parts. One is, we are very governance oriented. We think that there are very important bright blue lines that you need to really understand. We want to make sure that when we do, how you train a model is critical to us. You can create bias in a model, and you can unintentionally create bias in a model. So a lot of the work we do with vendors and others is making sure we understand how you train a model, that it's appropriately done, that we don't accidentally implement either clinical or non-clinical bias in the model, that we are clear about where we're trying to go and what the objective of a piece of work is. I mentioned, human in the loop. Right now, that's a really, really important concept for everything that we're doing today. One of the things we're part of our strategy is to be excellent adopters of AI. It's not our belief that we're going to uniquely develop every element of this. So one of the things we're doing is working with key vendors to really say, how do we become a premier adopter of what you're building, and how do we influence how it's done? I think the Abridge adoption is a great example of that. I mean, we've implemented a bridge across now 40 hospitals and 600 medical offices. It's the largest, I believe, the largest AI implementation in healthcare at the point. And so, the ambient listening technology, it's been really efficient. We tested the heck out of it. We, piloted it in small, and then really, in a sense, we kind of stepped back and let the clinicians drive the adoption. So it was not in any way, shape, or form, a top-down exercise, which for me, we've all been around clinical technology for way more years than we're willing to admit anymore. And this is the fastest adoption of clinical technology I have ever seen. So, when you look at the power of AI, if you actually are solving a really well understood problem in a well understood way that has direct value to the adopter and what they're doing, I think AI has an opportunity to accelerate that adoption curve in ways that we've probably never seen before. If you look at the adoption curve for EMRs, how many years, how much heartache has been on that particular journey. And we're seeing these kinds of things, I think, are real opportunities. The other place that I'm really excited about AI is in the contact center. Not so much that it's going to be a chatbot replacing a person. It's more, how can you use ambient listening technologies to anticipate the information you need to provide the member patient what they need? And how can you query, our contact center, frankly, has about 60 independent transactional system interfaces. So you can imagine the navigation of all of this back end stuff. So rather than spending your time trying to teach someone how to navigate these arcane systems or read benefit strings and understand them, what you really do is you're teaching them how to have a conversation effectively with your members, and then let the system with the AI support really bring the data forward, bring the information forward, know the member in ways that we couldn't ever do before, and wrap that around these conversations, cut down on transfers, cut down on, and make sure that all the talk time you have is right where you want to get to, generate an auto summary, and then make sure you've got that available in case someone calls back. The other thing is context. Right now, we're getting into where what modality you start a conversation. You might start it in digital. You might start it with a front-end IVR. You might start it with a chat bot. You might start it in different ways. Today, before this technology, we never, the technical term is session, but we never kind of kept that context. So every time you changed modalities, you as a member or a patient had to explain the context over and over and over again. If we transferred you, you had to do it. So now with these new technologies, that context can follow along automatically, which is, is one of the real game changers of how do you, make people satisfied with an interaction of not having to repeat themselves over and over again. So those are just, some of the examples of what areas that we're working in. And again, it's responsible AI, number one, non-biased AI, human in the loop, and make sure that you're actually meeting someone where they need to be met with the technology that you have, and you're simplifying process, both for the internal person and the external person.
Wow, that's really exciting. I mean, as a patient, again, I'm bringing that up again. Wouldn't that be awesome? To be able to not have to repeat myself every time I get, transferred. Kendra, what's our experience with AI and our clients? What are we seeing, and where's the innovation and where's the success coming?
And I think largely in the payer community, and I'll not sort of address the exam room or the clinical community, because not all payers sort of are like Kaiser, certainly with the combination. I would say that they're experimenting cautiously, using it like almost any company would for productivity, non-clinical kind of productivity, and then experimenting in the clinical realm for how it can help be what I like to call sort of a clinical assistant. So still human in the loop, as you described, Robert, so that it can help do things. It can scan the thousands of PDFs that come into a UM department and find things and point somebody in the right direction rather than having to read everything. So it really, I think, is mainly focused around productivity today. Whether it be in clinical or even in claims. I think the more innovative uses will come once there becomes a level of trust in the technology, and an understanding of how it can and cannot be used.
Rob, I'm going to ask Kendra a follow-up question before I go back to you. And that is because I know we're working on sort of data quality and data integrity. What's without data, good data, it's really difficult to do AI. Kendra, what are we seeing, and are there efforts that we're seeing to sort of improve the quality of data in healthcare?
I think we're seeing a larger focus on that in the payer community, certainly than I've ever seen, because there's a shift in how clinical data is being used and will be used in the future. It's largely been historically brought into a payer community in sort of siloed functional areas, and they use it sort of in their way, and they don't have to worry about aggregating it or managing it or normalizing it, or deduplicating it, or any of the things that you have to start doing when you start to aggregate and create, whether you're going for just aggregated data or a longitudinal patient record or wherever your sort of destination is. And, data quality is kind of a big term. And I think sometimes it has a connotation that says the data is bad. And I don't think the data is bad, it's just inconsistent. And so whether that inconsistency is because of the way a provider implemented or uses their EHR, or because of the code sets that they use versus what the payer might use, there's all kinds of inconsistencies in the data that makes it less than perfectly usable and then described as having quality issues on the payer side. So I think payers are just starting to realize that they're going to have to do something with this data if they want to use it and really get the value out of having a broad swath of clinical data, which they're going to have for a variety of reasons in ways that they haven't had before.
Rob, as with Kaiser being an organization that combines care and coverage, do you have the same data challenges as we have more broadly in healthcare? Or do you have a different set of challenges? What are your challenges around data quality?
We probably have a leg up. We're on a single EMR across our 20,000 plus clinicians. So you get a level of standardization that simply doesn't probably exist anywhere else, I would offer, in the industry. So we have a little leg up in that space. I think a lot of our competitors still think of clinical data as faxes that they use to support an author or referral, and you read it. And it doesn't really matter if there's some variation, because you're reading it, the human understands, they make the connection. When you try to automate that, boy, oh boy, that you run into a really different set of, as Kendra said, a really different set of questions, from, what is a fundamental clinical data set and how do you think about it? What are the code sets that are behind it? And what is the clinical thinking that actually generated it? So we have some advantage, certainly in that we have a level of consistency and usage that probably no one else in the industry, I suspect, has at the same level. You know, do we struggle with data? Yes, of course we struggle with data. Do we spend an enormous amount of time thinking about how do you cultivate it? How do you manage it? How do you make sure it's accurate? Yes, absolutely. It would be unbelievable if we didn't say that we have all of those things. And AI is going to be the moment because if your data is not clean, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
It becomes obvious. It becomes more obvious more quickly than anything else that I know because you're feeding it through to this LLM or anything else. And it has no buffer. It doesn't go sit there and go, well, wonder if they're just confused here. It doesn't have that moment. So, data is going to be critical. It'll be really interesting when the payer-payer interchange becomes, we've been kind of on the precipice of that for some time now. I'm really interested in a couple things, the quality of the data, but actually, what are patients' expectations? So I'm going to change plans. I'm changing payers. I know that this longitudinal data about me is going to potentially come across. What do I believe you're going to do with it? And I don't know that anyone has answered that question about what's my expectation? Are you going to now know all these things about me and you actually do something with them? Are you just going to admire the data? Are you just going to stick it in a data warehouse and pretend it doesn't exist because I don't want to deal with it? So, again, it'll be a question of, yes, we have a new clinical data set that we've defined, but how do I trust it? Is it patient reported? Is it clinical? Is it in the legal medical record? Is it, so there's a really fascinating set of questions coming when we really start thinking about that. And they really will be on the edge of AI, ML, data quality. We're probably 2 years from maybe, I keep not pulling that trigger of seeing that come into the industry.
Well, it's a fun time to be in the industry, isn't it? For all of us. Let's switch gears a little bit, Rob. You said that you were on the CAQH board.
Mm-hmm.
Since all of our listeners may not be familiar with CAQH, can you provide a brief overview? And then tell us how that role has influenced your views on broader data infrastructure and shared industry priorities.
Yeah, so first off, CAQH stands for the Council for Affordable Quality Healthcare and was formed in 1998 and originally had to do really with formulary adoption at the very, very, very earliest point. But really what it was a coming together as a mutual benefit organization of the 13 major plans in the US. And the idea was, how do we define those things that we don't compete on, but if we can improve, it'll make it a more efficient and effective for everyone? How do you raise all the boats simultaneously? And that's the fundamental idea. And there's two pieces to it. There's core, which is, of course, the part that is actually a standard setting organization under HHS for HIPAA, and actually publishes the implementation guides and does all of that really interesting standards work that's really been so critical. And then there's a product side to CAQH, primarily both in the provider space, credentialing space, and then also coordination of benefits. And I think COB is a great example where data from all of these plans are coming together in a way. Now we can automate a lot of the decisions around coordination of benefits because we can share who's covered under what and do it in an industry-wide way. And the same idea, we've all been on the provider directory journey, and certainly with CMS's improved interest in provider directories. I don't know what the right word there is. What I would say is that, when some of the plans decided to create very narrow networks, there's a thin line between a narrow network and an illusory network. And so the directory becomes a really critical part of, can I actually use this network to get care, which I think got CMS much more interested in directories. And that's part of the idea, is how do I get providers, frankly, fundamentally don't care that much about directories. Plans care a lot about directories, and that's been a hard thing to bridge. So CAQH has taken on the mission both of being in the regulatory space, making sure that guides allow for the implementation of regulations and advocacy, and then developing products that support everyone in the industry for those areas we don't compete on, but efficiency allows everyone to deliver more effectively.
Kendra, Rob mentioned directories and with the payers care about that. What are our clients saying about directories?
It's at the moment, it's not a very hot topic. It was a hot topic. At the moment, it's been sort of subsumed by some of the other things that are going on. I think that at one level, sort of the mechanics of the directory, I think most payers feel like they're not in control of that, because keeping a directory, not who's in network and who isn't in network, but keeping a directory of locations and phone numbers and which providers are in each group is a nightmare for them. And yet they don't hold the answers. The provider community holds the answers. And if they don't update their data, even though they're supposed to update it, if they don't, then the payers may have all the mechanics covered, but they can't control the source of the changes in the data. And I think that's a challenge that's a bit of the chicken and the egg thing, that I'm not sure has been resolved by technology, and I'm not sure if technology is the way to resolve it. If there's a human behavior component in that that is required to actually have accurate directory data.
That's fascinating. We get that chicken and the egg a lot in our careers, don't we? Let's switch gears for a second. And let's do a bit of crystal ball gazing. Rob, what's one health IT trend or challenge that you think isn't getting enough attention and should be on everybody's radar?
Well, there's a number. I mean, the one that I would go to is actually security. We look at the events that have happened, hospitals held hostage, EMRs captured. The impact on patients is dramatic. Surgeries canceled, records lost. You look at the Change Healthcare event, and the impact that had broadly across health. It almost bankrupted providers. It impacted everybody. So when we think about something that should be top of everybody's mind, that's one of those things. And while in all of our companies, there are pockets of people where that's what they do 24/7. They wake up in the morning, think about it, and go to bed thinking about it. It's not as pervasive as you would think. And so I'm concerned about AI's ability to be on the bad actor side of security. And also, we've seen national actors, North Korea certainly has been in the press recently, and they're willing to go anywhere where there's money to be made. I mean, stealing Bitcoin's fun, but they also are more than willing to ransom a hospital. And so I think we've got to be much more focused on how do we resolve and how do we all contribute to managing and making sure we have effective security in place.
That's a great answer. Kendra, I'm going to ask the same question of you. What health IT trend or challenge do you think isn't getting enough attention and should be on everybody's radar?
I guess I'm going to call it a health IT challenge, even though it really doesn't have anything to do with technology. I think that the issue around the right to have and share and use data is challenging for everybody. It's especially as data starts moving more fluidly. if a payer has data that they got from somewhere, can they use it for certain things? Can they share it in certain ways? There's certainly with HIPAA, there's privacy regulation, there's state privacy regulation, but there's a layer above sort of that basic sort of requirements around privacy, around data use, and that I think are a challenge, and will continue to be a barrier for the industry unless we sort of get some normalization in the rights and requirements and obligations when you're sharing data.
So my view is one of the areas that isn't getting enough attention is pharmacy interoperability. So that's the ability to sort of get clinical information to a pharmacist that's in a community setting that empowers them to practice at the top of their license. And it helps us fill in sort of gaps that exist right now where maybe we have sort of medical deserts or areas where we don't have clinicians, and maybe telehealth hasn't quite reached those areas, and there are certain things that pharmacists can do, low-hanging fruit, if you will, that still is within their license, that sort of helps improve the healthcare of communities and helps payers with their quality measures and things like that. And I think figuring out a business model to be able to support sort of pharmacists practicing at the top of their license, advanced pharmacy, if you will, I think is a huge opportunity that we have in healthcare, and it's one that we're spending a little bit more time on. We just launched a project where we're looking into that more carefully to look at sort of the business model for that and how we can compensate pharmacists for appropriately practicing at the top of their license. So that's an opportunity that I see. Rob, if you could wave a magic wand and fix one tech or interoperability issue overnight, what would it be?
I was afraid you were going to ask that question. For me, actually, Kendra, you kind of got in front of it. How do we move data freely, effectively, and in the right way so that everyone has the data that they need to make the right decisions at the right time, and while same time respecting the privacy and privilege of the patient or the member around the data? I don't know the answer to this one. I can respect both sides of the question, and and I don't know to what extent it kind of lives within the nature of Americans and how we feel about personal data. And then at the same time, I recognize we're forced to make decisions suboptimally because we don't, in fact, get where we need to go on this question. So if I could wave a magic wand, I think the free motion of data would be it. But boy, I don't know how to resolve the conflicts that surround that.
Well, good that we don't have to resolve them on today's call. We can raise issues like a good podcast. Before we wrap up, because we're getting close to our sort of time, Rob, do you have a message or a call to action for your peers in the industry? Maybe it's a group that should be getting involved, be getting involved with, or it's something they could start doing within their own organization.
There's a question we need to answer as payers, which is, are we going to compete on the nature of our clinical policy, or is clinical policy something that needs to be agreed upon, and then we simply all adjudicate to a clinical policy? It became a pointed issue with the terrible crisis around the United Healthcare. But it's a true thing. Are there really 25 interpretations, or are we really moving to a moment in time that we can be pretty clear about what a clinical appropriateness is, how one tests it, what the measure should be, and where there's evolving things, it's the patient and the doctor together who are closest to the issue. So how do we support them in making the right decision? I really would love the industry to come together and really struggle with and come to some conclusions around that question. I get fraud and abuse, I get other things, but I think it's still doable even in that context.
Kendra, do you have any comments on that or any final thoughts or advice for payers who want to move from just checking the compliance box to actually building for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I echo the thoughts on clinical policy and their clinical evidence is sort of pretty consistent. And being able to apply it consistently would move a lot of angst over prior authorization forward. I think, from the payer perspective on the check the box versus innovate or really try to derive value, I hope that payers will suspend their disbelief about the fact that implementing these API technologies will actually create the movement of data and envision that if the data was moving, suspend that disbelief, and providers will use the prior auth capabilities and they will request data on their patients before visits and they will get data from other payers and it'll be shared, and pretend all of that works. What could you do in that environment? How could you leverage it to provide better care for your members? How could you leverage it to improve the productivity and the efficiency of the internal staff? How could you provide better services to the employer community? I mean, I think if you could envision that state and suspend the disbelief that it won't ever happen in healthcare, there's tons of opportunity there, but it requires that sort of belief that we'll get there, whether it's next year or the year after or in 5 years.
And taking a step back and not just, like I said, checking the box, but taking a step back and thinking more broadly. And sometimes with all the things that we're responsible for, that's where consultants can help. So that's one of the things that we do. So Rob and Kendra, I want to thank you both for joining us today. It's been a rich, wide-ranging discussion, and I appreciate the time, the insights, and the candor. To our listeners, if you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the Dish on Health IT on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite platform. And check out the POCP YouTube channel for extended content and special segments. Until next time, remember, Health IT is a dish best served hot.
Is it a challenge to stay on top of interoperability regulations and the flurry of activity with FHIR accelerators? Email us at interopoutlook@pocp.com to learn more about our Interoperability Outlook subscription monitoring service.